Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood at the entrance of the prestigious Naval War College, her crisp white uniform perfectly pressed, her black hair pulled back in regulation style. At 28, she was younger than most officers attending the Advanced Strategic Studies program, and she could feel the weight of curious stares as she walked through the marble corridors of the historic building. The morning sun streamed through tall windows as Sarah made her way to the registration desk. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations that weren't quite low enough to escape her notice. "Is she really Navy?" one voice questioned. "Maybe she's just here for some civilian program," another suggested with barely concealed skepticism. Sarah had grown accustomed to these reactions throughout her military career. As a woman of Asian descent in a field still dominated by white men, she had learned to let such comments roll off her shoulders like water off a ship's hull. But today felt different. Today marked the beginning of the most important phase of her naval education, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of being here. The registration process was smooth enough, though Sarah noticed how the clerk's eyes lingered on her uniform insignia with a hint of confusion before processing her paperwork. She was handed a thick packet of course materials and directed toward the main auditorium where the opening ceremony would take place. As she entered the grand hall, Sarah was struck by its impressive architecture. The room spoke of naval tradition and honor, with portraits of distinguished admirals lining the walls and battle flags hanging from the ceiling. Rows of seats filled with uniformed officers created a sea of navy blue and white, punctuated occasionally by the khaki of marine dress uniforms. Sarah found a seat in the middle section, choosing a spot that wasn't too far forward but wouldn't place her in the very back either. She wanted to be visible, but not conspicuous. As she settled into her chair, she noticed the officer next to her, a tall man with graying temples who wore the insignia of a Navy commander. "First time at the War College?" he asked politely, though his tone carried an undertone of assumption that this might be some kind of orientation for civilian staff or contractors. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied respectfully. "I'm looking forward to the Strategic Studies program." The commander's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, you're enrolled in the program? What's your background?" "I'm a surface warfare officer," Sarah explained. "Currently serving aboard the USS Princeton out of San Diego." The man's expression shifted to one of surprise. Then, what might have been skepticism. "Really? That's interesting. The Princeton is a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, isn't it? Quite a prestigious assignment." Sarah nodded, sensing the doubt in his voice. She had commanded a division on the Princeton for the past 2 years, earning commendations for her leadership during several challenging deployments. But she had learned that her accomplishments often needed to be proven rather than simply acknowledged. More officers filed into the auditorium, and Sarah observed the dynamics around her. Small groups formed naturally, with officers gravitating toward others of similar rank and experience. She noticed several women scattered throughout the audience, but they were significantly outnumbered. The conversations around her buzzed with talk of previous assignments, deployment stories, and expectations for the coming year of study. A group of 3 officers seated directly behind Sarah were engaged in what they clearly thought was a private conversation. "I wonder how they're choosing students these days," one of them mused. "Standards seem to be getting more flexible." "Well, they have to meet their quotas somehow," another responded with a chuckle. "I heard they're really pushing for diversity now, even if it means lowering the bar." The third voice chimed in. "As long as they can keep up with the coursework, I suppose it doesn't matter how they got here." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her gaze fixed forward. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times throughout her career. The assumption that her presence was due to quotas rather than merit was nothing new, but it never stopped stinging. She thought about her academic record at the Naval Academy, where she had graduated in the top 10% of her class. She remembered the grueling months of surface warfare officer school, where she had excelled in navigation, weapons systems, and tactical planning. The medals and commendations she had earned during her deployments spoke to her competence and dedication. As more officers settled into their seats, Sarah overheard fragments of other conversations that revealed the caliber of experience represented in the room. Many spoke of command positions, combat deployments, and advanced degrees from prestigious institutions. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness about joining this elite group for a year of intensive study. The auditorium gradually filled to capacity, creating an impressive assembly of the Navy's rising leadership. Sarah estimated there were nearly 200 officers present, representing various specialties from surface warfare to aviation, from submarines to logistics. The diversity of experience promised rich discussions and learning opportunities in the months ahead. A hush fell over the crowd as several distinguished-looking officers entered from a side door and took seats on the stage. Sarah recognized some of them from photographs she had seen in Navy publications. These were the faculty members and senior staff who would guide their education over the coming year. The ceremony began with the presentation of colors, and Sarah stood with military precision as the American flag and Navy colors were marched to the front of the auditorium. The familiar ritual brought a sense of solemnity to the gathering, reminding everyone of the serious purpose that had brought them together. After the colors were posted, the commandant of the Naval War College stepped to the podium. Rear Admiral James Harrison was a distinguished officer with a reputation for both intellectual rigor and practical wisdom. His opening remarks emphasized the importance of strategic thinking in an increasingly complex world and the responsibility that would rest on the shoulders of the officers in the audience. "You represent the future of naval leadership," Admiral Harrison declared, his voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. "The knowledge and perspectives you gain here will shape not only your own careers, but the direction of our Navy in the years to come." Sarah felt a surge of pride and determination as she listened to the Admiral's words. Despite the whispered doubts and skeptical glances she had encountered, she belonged here. Her uniform bore the same insignia of dedication and service as every other officer in the room. As the ceremony continued with introductions of key faculty members and an overview of the curriculum, Sarah mentally prepared herself for the challenges ahead. She knew that her performance over the coming year would not only determine her own future, but would also influence how other women and minorities would be perceived in similar positions. The morning's events concluded with instructions for the afternoon's activities, which would include placement examinations and initial faculty meetings. As officers began to file out of the auditorium, the conversations resumed with increased energy and anticipation. Sarah gathered her materials and stood to leave, but found her path blocked by the commander who had questioned her earlier. He extended his hand with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I'm Commander Peterson," he said. "I apologize if I seemed surprised earlier. I don't think I've served with many women on cruisers." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Lieutenant Chun. And no offense taken, sir. It's still relatively uncommon, though that's changing." "Well, I look forward to hearing your perspectives in class," Peterson said. The Pacific Fleet operations could certainly benefit from fresh thinking. As Sarah walked toward the exit, she reflected on the morning's interactions. The skepticism and assumptions were familiar, but so was the eventual acceptance that often followed once her competence became apparent. She had learned to be patient with the process while never compromising her own standards or expectations. The afternoon would bring new challenges as she began the academic work that had brought her here. But, for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at having taken this important step in her naval career. The whispers and doubts would fade, she knew, replaced by the respect that came with proven performance and unwavering dedication. Outside the auditorium, small groups of officers continued their conversations in the bright sunshine, forming the initial bonds that would sustain them through the intensive months ahead. Sarah joined one such group, introducing herself and listening to the experiences and expectations of her fellow students. The real work was just beginning, but Lieutenant Sarah Chun was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her uniform represented not just her own achievements, but the progress of all those who had fought for the right to serve their country with honor and distinction. She would wear it with pride, knowing that every success would open doors for others who would follow in her footsteps. 3 months into the program, Lieutenant Sarah Chun had established herself as one of the most prepared and thoughtful students in her strategic studies cohort. Her papers on naval logistics in contested environments had earned praise from Professor Williams, a former destroyer captain known for his exacting standards. Yet despite her academic success, Sarah continued to face subtle challenges that her male colleagues seemed to navigate with ease. The morning briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as 24 officers prepared to present their analyses of a complex Pacific Fleet scenario. Each student had been assigned a different aspect of the operation, from submarine positioning to air support coordination. Sarah's topic focused on surface action group tactics, an area where her experience aboard the USS Princeton provided valuable real-world perspective. As students filed into the briefing room, Sarah noticed the familiar pattern of informal groups forming along lines of prior service and personal connections. The submarine officers naturally gravitated toward each other, sharing stories and insights that only they could fully appreciate. The aviators formed their own cluster, their conversations peppered with references to carrier operations and flight schedules. Sarah found herself, as often happened, somewhat between groups. Commander Peterson, who had become more friendly since their initial meeting, approached her with a coffee cup in hand. "Ready for your presentation, Lieutenant?" "As ready as anyone can be," Sarah replied, reviewing her notes one final time. "The surface warfare piece is critical to the overall operation, so I want to make sure I get it right." "I'm sure you will," Peterson said, though something in his tone suggested he still harbored doubts about her expertise. "It's just that some of the concepts can be pretty complex when you're dealing with multiple ship formations." Sarah looked up from her notes, meeting his gaze directly. "Sir, I've commanded a division during 3 major exercises involving precisely these types of formations. I think I understand the complexity." Peterson's face reddened slightly. "Of course, I didn't mean to suggest. I'm sure your experience is valuable." Before Sarah could respond, Professor Williams entered the room and called for attention. The retired captain had a reputation for running tight, no-nonsense sessions that challenged every assumption and forced students to defend their conclusions with rigorous analysis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams began, "today's scenario represents the kind of complex, multi-domain operation our Navy may face in the coming decades. Each of you has prepared an analysis of one critical component. Together, your presentations should provide a comprehensive operational picture." The first presenter was Lieutenant Commander Jackson, an aviator who discussed air superiority requirements with the confidence that came from hundreds of carrier landings. His presentation was polished and detailed, earning appreciative nods from his colleagues and thoughtful questions from Professor Williams. As the presentations continued, Sarah observed the different styles and approaches her classmates brought to their analyses. Some relied heavily on theoretical frameworks learned in previous assignments or graduate studies. Others drew extensively from personal experience, sometimes to the detriment of broader strategic thinking. The best presentations seemed to blend both practical knowledge and academic rigor. When Sarah's turn came, she moved to the front of the room with quiet confidence. Her slides were clean and well-organized, presenting her analysis of surface action group positioning and movement in a clear, logical sequence. She began by outlining the operational environment and the specific challenges facing surface ships in the contested scenario. "The key consideration for surface action groups in this environment," Sarah explained, "is maintaining tactical flexibility while providing adequate protection for high-value units. Based on threat assessments and geographical constraints, I recommend a modified screening formation that allows for rapid repositioning." As she continued her presentation, Sarah drew upon specific examples from her deployments, describing how similar formations had been employed during exercises in the South China Sea. Her knowledge of radar capabilities, weapon ranges, and communication protocols was evident in every slide and explanation. Professor Williams listened intently, occasionally making notes, but allowing Sarah to complete her presentation without interruption. When she finished, he leaned forward slightly. "Lieutenant Shun, your analysis of the screening formation is sound, but I'm curious about your assessment of logistics support. How do you maintain fuel and ordnance supplies while maintaining the tactical flexibility you've described?" Sarah had anticipated this question, having wrestled with the logistics challenge while preparing her analysis. "Sir, that's where the modified formation becomes crucial. By positioning the logistics vessels in a flexible diamond pattern rather than a traditional line formation, we can maintain supply lines while allowing combat units to maneuver as needed." "Interesting approach," Williams nodded. "Can you elaborate on how this would work in practice?" For the next 10 minutes, Sarah fielded questions that probed every aspect of her analysis. Williams challenged her assumptions about enemy capabilities, questioned her recommendations for communication protocols, and pressed her to defend her timeline for formation changes. Throughout the questioning, Sarah remained composed and knowledgeable, drawing upon her practical experience while acknowledging the limitations of her analysis. When the questioning concluded, Williams nodded with apparent satisfaction. "Solid work, Lieutenant. Your understanding of surface warfare tactics is evident." As Sarah returned to her seat, she noticed the expressions on her classmates' faces. Some showed genuine respect for her performance, while others seemed surprised by the depth of her knowledge. Commander Peterson, in particular, appeared to be reassessing his earlier assumptions about her capabilities. The presentations continued through the afternoon, with each student contributing their piece of the operational puzzle. By the end of the session, a complex picture had emerged of the challenges and opportunities facing naval forces in the hypothetical scenario. Professor Williams concluded the session with a synthesis of the various presentations, highlighting strengths and weaknesses in the overall analysis. He particularly noted the importance of coordination between different warfare specialties and the need for flexible thinking in complex operational environments. "One thing that impressed me today," Williams added, "was the quality of practical experience many of you brought to your analyses. Lieutenant Chin's work on surface formations, Lieutenant Commander Jackson's air operations assessment, and Commander Martinez's submarine positioning all reflected deep understanding of real-world operations." As students gathered their materials and prepared to leave, several approached Sarah to discuss her presentation. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, a submarine officer who had been particularly quiet during previous classes, stopped by her desk. "That was impressive work on the surface formations," he said. "I hadn't considered how the logistics positioning could affect tactical flexibility. Mind if I ask where you served before coming here?" "USS Princeton, out of San Diego," Sarah replied. "We deployed twice to the Pacific during my tour, including some exercises that used similar formations." "The Princeton's got a good reputation," Brooks acknowledged. "I bet you picked up some useful insights working with the strike group." Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Williams, who approached Sarah's desk as other students filed out of the room. "Lieutenant, do you have a moment?" he asked. Sarah gathered her materials quickly. "Of course, sir." Williams waited until the room had mostly cleared before speaking. "I wanted to commend you on today's presentation. Your analysis was thorough, and your responses to questions showed real depth of understanding." "Thank you, sir. I tried to balance theoretical considerations with practical experience." "You succeeded," Williams said. "I'm curious about your background. Your record shows strong academic performance, but your practical knowledge suggests significant operational experience as well." Sarah outlined her service aboard the Princeton, describing her progression from junior officer to division commander and her involvement in major exercises and deployments. Williams listened with growing interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific operations or responsibilities. "Impressive trajectory," Williams concluded. "Have you given thought to your next assignment after completing the program here?" "I'm hoping for a department head position, possibly leading to eventual command," Sarah replied honestly. "But I know the competition is intense." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "It is indeed. But performances like today's suggest you're well prepared for increased responsibility. I hope you'll continue to bring this level of preparation and insight to our remaining sessions." As Sarah left the briefing room, she reflected on the day's events. The presentation had gone well, and she had clearly demonstrated her competence to both faculty and fellow students. Yet she knew that each success was just one step in a longer journey toward proving herself worthy of the opportunities she sought. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the War College campus as Sarah walked toward her quarters. She had evening study planned, preparing for the next day's seminar on coalition warfare. The program's pace was demanding, but she was thriving on the intellectual challenges and the opportunity to deepen her understanding of naval strategy. That evening, as she reviewed materials for the coalition warfare seminar, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her mentor, Captain Rodriguez, who was currently serving at the Pentagon. "Heard good things about your performance at the War College. Keep up the excellent work. The Navy needs officers who can think strategically and lead effectively." The message brought a smile to Sarah's face. Word of her performance was apparently traveling beyond the confines of the academic environment. In the Navy's close-knit community, reputation and performance were constantly evaluated and discussed. Positive feedback from faculty at the War College could significantly impact her future opportunities. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction about her progress in the program. The doubts and skepticism she had encountered upon arrival were gradually giving way to recognition of her capabilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to demonstrate her value as a future naval leader. The path ahead remained demanding, but Lieutenant Sarah Chun was proving herself capable of meeting every challenge with competence, determination, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing she belonged exactly where she was. The spring semester brought new challenges to the Naval War College, and Lieutenant Sarah Chun found herself selected for the most prestigious opportunity available to second-year students: participation in the Global Maritime Strategy Symposium. This annual event brought together naval officers from allied nations, defense contractors, and senior Pentagon officials to discuss emerging threats and strategic responses in the maritime domain. Sarah's selection for the symposium came as a surprise to some of her classmates, though Professor Williams had specifically recommended her based on her outstanding performance in strategic analysis courses. The event would take place over 4 days, with students serving as research assistants to senior faculty members who were presenting papers to the international audience. The assignment board posted outside the academic office drew crowds of curious students each morning. Sarah discovered she had been paired with Captain Rebecca Martinez, a former submarine commander who now served as the War College's Director of Strategic Studies. Captain Martinez was known for her brilliant analytical mind and her demanding standards, but also for her mentorship of promising junior officers. When Sarah reported to Captain Martinez's office for their initial planning meeting, she was struck by the captain's direct, no-nonsense approach. The office walls were lined with books on naval strategy, maritime law, and international relations, creating an atmosphere of serious scholarship. "Lieutenant Chun," Captain Martinez began without preamble, "I requested you specifically for this symposium because your work on surface warfare tactics caught my attention. We'll be presenting a paper on distributed maritime operations in contested environments, and I need someone who understands both the theoretical framework and the practical challenges." "I'm honored to work with you, Captain," Sarah replied. "What specific aspects of the research would you like me to focus on?" Captain Martinez outlined the scope of their presentation, which would examine how naval forces might operate effectively when faced with advanced anti-access/area denial capabilities. The research required analysis of historical precedents, current technological capabilities, and emerging tactical concepts. The audience will include admirals from the Royal Navy, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and the Royal Australian Navy, Martinez explained. "They're not interested in theoretical discussions that have no practical application. Our analysis needs to be both intellectually rigorous and operationally relevant." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into the research with characteristic intensity. She spent long hours in the War College library, analyzing case studies from previous conflicts and examining classified assessments of current threats. Her experience aboard the USS Princeton proved invaluable as she worked to understand how theoretical concepts would translate into real-world operations. The research phase also provided Sarah with unprecedented access to senior military officials. Captain Martinez arranged for her to interview recently returned deployment commanders, Pentagon staff officers, and even a retired admiral who had overseen major naval operations in the Pacific. These conversations provided insights that could never be found in textbooks or academic papers. During one particularly valuable session, Sarah interviewed Commander Thompson, who had recently completed a deployment as operations officer aboard a carrier strike group. Thompson's first-hand account of operating in disputed waters provided crucial details about the practical challenges of maintaining tactical flexibility while minimizing vulnerability to long-range weapons systems. "The key insight," Thompson explained, "is that distributed operations aren't just about spreading out your ships. It's about maintaining effective command and control while operating across vast distances with degraded communications." Sarah incorporated this insight into the analytical framework she was developing for Captain Martinez. Her ability to translate practical operational challenges into strategic analysis impressed the captain, who began involving Sarah more directly in the development of their presentation. As the symposium approached, Sarah found herself working closely with officers from other nations who were also preparing presentations. The international character of the event provided fascinating insights into different naval traditions and strategic perspectives. She spent an evening discussing logistics challenges with a Royal Navy commander who had extensive experience in Middle Eastern operations, and learned about innovative tactics from a Japanese officer who specialized in anti-submarine warfare. The week before the symposium, Captain Martinez conducted a practice session with Sarah serving as the primary briefer for the technical portions of their presentation. The captain observed intently as Sarah explained complex tactical concepts using clear visual aids and practical examples. "Your presentation skills have improved dramatically since the beginning of the semester," Martinez noted afterward. "You're learning to communicate complex ideas to audiences with varying levels of technical background." The observation was accurate. Sarah had consciously worked to develop her briefing abilities, recognizing that effective communication would be crucial to her future career advancement. She had practiced extensively, recording herself to identify areas for improvement and seeking feedback from classmates and faculty. The symposium opening ceremony took place in the War College's historic auditorium, with flags representing participating nations displayed prominently on the stage. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she looked around the room, filled with senior military officers from around the world. The presence of several admirals and generals created an atmosphere of serious purpose and high-level discourse. Admiral Harrison, the War College commandant, delivered opening remarks that emphasized the importance of international cooperation in addressing maritime security challenges. His speech touched on emerging threats, technological developments, and the need for adaptive strategic thinking. "The naval officers in this room represent the collective wisdom and experience of our allied nations," Admiral Harrison declared. "The discussions and analyses presented here over the next 4 days will help shape our understanding of future naval operations." Following the opening ceremony, the first day featured presentations on various aspects of maritime strategy. Sarah attended sessions on everything from cybersecurity challenges to emerging weapons technologies, taking detailed notes that would inform her own presentation the following day. The evening reception provided an opportunity for informal networking, and Sarah found herself in conversation with officers whose perspectives differed significantly from her own experience. A Royal Australian Navy captain shared insights about operations in the Southern Ocean, while a German naval officer discussed NATO cooperation in the Baltic Sea. These conversations reinforced Sarah's growing appreciation for the complexity of international naval operations. The challenges facing the United States Navy were part of a broader set of security concerns that required coordinated responses from allied nations. The second day of the symposium featured the presentation Sarah had worked so hard to prepare. Captain Martinez introduced the topic and provided strategic context, then turned to Sarah for the detailed operational analysis that formed the core of their argument. Standing before an audience that included 2 admirals, numerous captains and commanders, and defense policy experts, Sarah felt a moment of nervousness. Then, her training and preparation took over, and she began speaking with confidence about distributed maritime operations. "The fundamental challenge in contested environments," Sarah explained, "is maintaining offensive capability while minimizing vulnerability to long-range precision weapons. Our analysis suggests that traditional formation tactics must be adapted to address this challenge." She proceeded to outline specific recommendations for ship positioning, communication protocols, and logistics support that would enable naval forces to operate effectively despite sophisticated enemy capabilities. Her presentation drew upon historical examples, current threat assessments, and innovative tactical concepts that she had developed through her research. The audience listened intently as Sarah described how these concepts had been tested during recent exercises, including some in which she had personally participated. Her ability to connect theoretical analysis with practical experience was evident in every slide and explanation. When she concluded the formal presentation, the question and answer session proved even more challenging than she had anticipated. A Royal Navy Rear Admiral asked pointed questions about logistics vulnerabilities, while a Pentagon official challenged her assumptions about enemy capabilities. Lieutenant Chun, the Admiral asked, "Your analysis assumes that distributed forces can maintain adequate logistics support across vast distances. How do you address the vulnerability of supply ships operating independently?" Sarah had anticipated this question during her preparation. "Sir, our recommendation is for adaptive logistics positioning that responds to the tactical situation. Rather than fixed supply chains, we envision flexible support that can reposition as needed while maintaining coverage for combat units." The questioning continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Sarah fielding inquiries about every aspect of her analysis. Throughout the session, she remained composed and knowledgeable, drawing upon months of research and her operational experience to provide substantive responses. Captain Martinez observed the proceedings with evident satisfaction, occasionally stepping in to provide additional context but generally allowing Sarah to demonstrate her expertise independently. The captain's confidence in her research assistant was apparent to everyone in the room. When the questioning finally concluded, the audience's response was notably positive. Several officers approached Sarah afterward to discuss specific aspects of her analysis and to request copies of the research materials she had developed. Admiral Harrison, who had remained for the entire presentation, made a point of speaking with Sarah personally. "Lieutenant, that was an exceptional analysis," the Admiral said. "Your integration of theoretical concepts with practical operational considerations was particularly impressive. Have you considered pursuing advanced studies in strategic analysis?" The conversation with Admiral Harrison lasted several minutes, covering Sarah's background, her career goals, and her interests in strategic studies. The Admiral's attention was both flattering and potentially significant for her future career prospects. As the symposium continued through its remaining 2 days, Sarah found herself increasingly involved in high-level discussions about naval strategy and international cooperation. Her presentation had established her credibility within the community of naval strategists and operational planners. The final day concluded with closing remarks that emphasized the importance of continued dialogue and cooperation among allied nations. As participants prepared to return to their respective assignments, many exchanged contact information and expressed interest in maintaining the professional relationships they had established. For Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the symposium represented a significant milestone in her development as a naval officer. She had successfully presented complex strategic analysis to an international audience of senior military leaders and had demonstrated her capability to contribute meaningfully to high-level policy discussions. The experience also provided valuable perspective on her future career path. The intersection of strategic analysis, operational planning, and international cooperation appealed to her intellectual interests while building upon her practical naval experience. As she packed her materials and prepared to return to her regular coursework, Sarah reflected on how much she had learned during the intensive week of presentations and discussions. The symposium had expanded her understanding of global maritime challenges while providing networking opportunities that could prove valuable throughout her career. Captain Martinez's final evaluation was unequivocally positive, and she indicated that she would be recommending Sarah for advanced strategic studies opportunities. Such recommendations could open doors to prestigious assignments and accelerated career progression. The doubts and skepticism Sarah had encountered upon arriving at the War College seemed increasingly distant as she established herself as a serious student of naval strategy and a valuable contributor to important policy discussions. Her uniform now carried the credibility that came with proven performance at the highest levels of naval education. The final month of Lieutenant Sarah Chen's year at the Naval War College arrived with an unexpected opportunity that would define not only her remaining time at the institution, but potentially her entire naval career. The Chief of Naval Operations was scheduled to visit the War College for the annual Strategic Leadership Forum, and traditionally, one outstanding student was selected to present a strategic assessment to the assembled senior leadership. Professor Williams approached Sarah after her morning seminar on coalition maritime operations with news that would change everything. "Lieutenant Chun, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his expression more serious than usual. In his office, Williams closed the door and turned to face her directly. "The faculty has selected you to present the Student Strategic Assessment to Admiral Morrison and the senior leadership next week." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Admiral Morrison, the Chief of Naval Operations, was the highest-ranking officer in the Navy. The student presentation was traditionally delivered by someone selected for exceptional academic performance and leadership potential. "Sir, I'm honored by the selection," Sarah replied, though her mind was already racing through the implications. "What specific topic should I address?" "The theme for this year's forum is Naval Leadership in an Era of Strategic Competition," Williams explained. "You have considerable latitude in developing your specific focus, but the presentation should demonstrate strategic thinking that addresses current and future challenges facing naval leadership." Williams outlined the parameters of the assignment. Sarah would have 30 minutes to present her analysis, followed by a question-and-answer session with an audience that would include the Chief of Naval Operations, multiple 3- and 4-star admirals, senior Pentagon officials, and distinguished visiting scholars. "I should mention," Williams added, "that this selection has generated some discussion among the faculty and student body. Some feel that more senior students or those with command experience might be more appropriate choices." Sarah understood the subtext immediately. Despite her academic achievements and successful symposium presentation, some still questioned whether she possessed the experience and credibility necessary for such a high-profile assignment. "I appreciate your confidence in me, Professor," Sarah said. "I won't disappoint you or the institution." Williams smiled for the first time during their conversation. "I know you won't. Your work this year has been exceptional, and your presentation at the International Symposium demonstrated your ability to engage with senior leadership effectively." The week that followed was the most intense of Sarah's academic career. She immersed herself in research, developing an analysis that examined how naval leadership principles must evolve to address emerging challenges in great power competition. Her thesis focused on the need for adaptive leadership that could operate effectively across multiple domains while maintaining the core values that define naval service. Sarah's approach drew upon historical examples of naval leaders who had successfully navigated periods of strategic transition, from Admiral Nimitz's leadership during World War II to more recent examples of officers who had adapted to post-Cold War challenges. She analyzed how these leaders had balanced innovation with tradition, maintained fleet readiness while preparing for future conflicts, and inspired their subordinates during periods of uncertainty. The research process required Sarah to interview several retired admirals who had agreed to share their perspectives on leadership challenges. These conversations provided insights that could only come from officers who had commanded at the highest levels during periods of strategic change. Rear Admiral Patricia Williams, a former fleet commander who had overseen major naval operations in the Middle East, proved particularly helpful in shaping Sarah's thinking about adaptive leadership. "The fundamental challenge for naval leaders today," Admiral Williams explained during their interview, "is preparing for conflicts that may look nothing like previous wars while maintaining the readiness to fight today's threats. This requires a different kind of strategic thinking than we've needed in the past." Sarah incorporated this insight into her developing framework, arguing that future naval leaders must possess both operational excellence and strategic adaptability. Her analysis examined specific competencies that would be essential for officers advancing to senior leadership positions. As word spread about Sarah's selection for the presentation, reactions among her classmates were mixed. Some expressed genuine support and encouragement, while others seemed skeptical about the faculty's choice. Commander Peterson, who had grown to respect Sarah's capabilities over the course of the year, offered his assistance with preparation. "I know you'll do an outstanding job," Peterson told her. "Your strategic thinking has impressed everyone this year, and this is an opportunity to demonstrate that to the Navy's senior leadership." Other reactions were less supportive. Sarah overheard conversations that questioned whether her selection was based on merit or on the Navy's desire to showcase diversity in its rising leadership. These whispered doubts were painful but not surprising, and they only strengthened her determination to deliver an exceptional presentation. The preparation process involved multiple practice sessions with faculty members who challenged every aspect of her analysis. Professor Williams arranged for her to present to groups of War College staff who fired questions designed to test both her knowledge and her composure under pressure. During one particularly grueling practice session, Captain Martinez pressed Sarah on her recommendations for leadership development. "Lieutenant, you're advocating for significant changes in how we prepare officers for senior leadership. How do you respond to critics who argue that these changes might undermine traditional naval values?" Sarah had anticipated this challenge. "Captain, my argument is that adapting our leadership development actually reinforces naval values by ensuring they remain relevant in changing strategic environments. The values of honor, courage, and commitment don't change, but how we apply them must evolve." The practice sessions revealed areas where Sarah's analysis needed strengthening, and she spent long nights refining her arguments and preparing for potential questions. She knew that her performance would be scrutinized not only for its academic content, but as an indicator of her potential for future leadership roles. The day of the Strategic Leadership Forum arrived with crisp autumn weather that seemed to energize the entire War College campus. Senior officers began arriving early in the morning, their staff cars creating an impressive display of flag officer presence rarely seen outside the Pentagon. Sarah spent the morning reviewing her notes one final time and conducting vocal warm-up exercises to ensure her voice would project clearly in the large auditorium. She had chosen her dress blue uniform with particular care, ensuring every detail met the highest standards of military appearance. The forum's morning sessions featured presentations by distinguished scholars and senior military officials on various aspects of strategic competition. Sarah attended these sessions both to gather any last-minute insights and to observe the presentation styles that seemed most effective with the audience. Admiral Morrison's presence in the auditorium created an atmosphere of heightened attention and formality. The Chief of Naval Operations was known for his incisive questions and high expectations, and his reputation for identifying promising junior officers made this presentation particularly significant for Sarah's career. When Professor Williams introduced her as the selected student presenter, Sarah noticed the attention that focused on her as she walked to the podium. Some faces in the audience showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few reflected the kind of prejudgment she had learned to ignore throughout her career. "Admiral Morrison, distinguished guests, and fellow naval officers," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "Today I want to discuss how naval leadership must evolve to meet the challenges of strategic competition while maintaining the core values that define our service." Her presentation unfolded systematically, beginning with an analysis of the strategic environment and proceeding through specific leadership competencies that future naval leaders would need to develop. Sarah drew upon historical examples, current challenges, and projections about future operational requirements. The naval leaders of tomorrow must be comfortable operating in gray zone conflicts where traditional rules of engagement may not apply, Sarah explained. They must understand cyber warfare, space operations, and information campaigns while maintaining expertise in traditional naval operations. As she continued, Sarah noticed that Admiral Morrison was taking notes and appeared engaged with her analysis. Other senior officers in the audience were listening intently, and the skeptical expressions she had observed earlier seemed to be giving way to genuine interest. The most challenging portion of her presentation addressed the need for cultural change within naval leadership development. Sarah argued that the Navy must become more adaptive in identifying and developing leadership potential, looking beyond traditional career paths to find officers capable of strategic thinking. "We must be willing to recognize leadership potential in officers whose backgrounds or perspectives may differ from traditional patterns," Sarah stated, her voice carrying conviction. "The challenges we face are too complex to be addressed by any single type of leader or experience base." When she concluded her formal presentation, the question and answer session began immediately. Admiral Morrison asked the first question, his tone serious but not hostile. "Lieutenant Shun, your analysis suggests significant changes in how we develop naval leaders. What evidence do you have that current methods are inadequate?" Sarah had prepared extensively for this question. She cited specific examples of strategic challenges that had revealed gaps in leadership preparation, drawing upon recent operational experiences and lessons learned from other military services. "Sir, I'm not suggesting that current methods are fundamentally flawed, Sarah clarified. Rather, I'm arguing that we must expand our approaches to ensure we're developing the full range of competencies that future challenges will require. The questioning continued for nearly 25 minutes, with senior officers probing every aspect of her analysis. Questions addressed implementation challenges, resource requirements, and potential unintended consequences of the changes she proposed. Throughout the session, Sarah maintained her composure and demonstrated deep knowledge of both the theoretical frameworks and practical considerations involved in leadership development. Her responses showed the kind of strategic thinking that the audience had come to expect from War College graduates. Admiral Morrison asked the final question, and his inquiry was more personal than the others. Lieutenant, you've clearly given considerable thought to naval leadership development. How do you see yourself contributing to these changes as you advance in your career? Sarah paused briefly, recognizing the significance of the question. Sir, I hope to serve wherever the Navy needs me most, whether in operational commands or staff positions where I can contribute to policy development. My goal is to be part of the solution while continuing to learn from more experienced officers. When the questioning concluded, the applause was sustained and appeared genuine. Admiral Morrison approached her afterward, along with several other senior officers who wanted to discuss specific aspects of her presentation. Lieutenant Chun, Admiral Morrison said, that was an impressive analysis. Your strategic thinking and presentation skills suggest significant potential for future leadership responsibilities. The conversation with the Chief of Naval Operations lasted several minutes, covering Sarah's career goals, her experiences at the War College, and her interests in strategic studies. Admiral Morrison's attention was both professionally flattering and potentially career-defining. As the forum concluded and senior officers began departing, Sarah received congratulations from faculty members and fellow students. Even some who had initially questioned her selection acknowledged the quality of her presentation and analysis. Professor Williams found her as she gathered her materials. Sarah, that was exactly the kind of strategic thinking and communication skill we hoped to see. You've represented the War College exceptionally well. Captain Martinez also approached with praise for her performance. Lieutenant, presentations like that are why we invest in advanced education for promising officers. You've demonstrated the potential to contribute significantly to naval strategy and leadership. In the days that followed, word of Sarah's successful presentation spread throughout the naval community. Officers who had attended the forum shared positive assessments of her performance, and her academic advisors began discussing advanced opportunities that might be available upon her graduation. The transformation was remarkable. The young officer who had arrived at the War College amid skeptical whispers and doubtful glances was now recognized as one of the institution's most promising graduates. Her uniform bore not only the insignia of her rank, but the credibility that came with proven excellence at the highest levels of naval education. As Lieutenant Sarah Chun prepared for graduation and her next assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The doubts and challenges had never disappeared entirely, but they had been overwhelmed by demonstrated competence, unwavering dedication, and the kind of strategic thinking that the Navy desperately needed in an era of great power competition. Her success would open doors for others who would follow, proving that excellence could emerge from unexpected places and that the Navy's future strength lay in embracing the full range of talent within its ranks. The Admiral had saluted her potential, but Sarah knew the real work was just beginning.